I was just about to tape this commentary when news came through of the Nobel Peace Prize recipient for this year, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And I'd like to make a comment about that because I find it a very curious choice. Now, undoubtedly, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia is an exceptional fellow, I don't dispute it. But he simply has affirmed a peace agreement which was put in place 20 years ago. And so I'm not entirely comprehending how this all works. The war between Ethiopia and Eritrea occurred between 1998 and the year 2000. It was dreadful. I remember vividly sitting in the Sheraton Hotel in 1998 in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, with a group of Ethiopian friends who were actually crying because of what they anticipated the war would do. And they were right. Tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides were killed. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent, which should never have been spent on armaments, over a piece of blighted land which neither really needed. But it ended. It ended in the middle of 2000 with a peace agreement signed called the Algiers Agreement because it was signed in Algeria. And there was a peacekeeping force set up by the United Nations. There was an Eritrean-Ethiopian boundary commission set up to put disputes into the hands of an arbitration commission in The Hague. And over the course of the last 20 years, that's what's happened. There have been occasional skirmishes, a number of disputes arbitrated, but the fact that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia last year affirmed or concluded or consecrated an agreement which had been signed 20 years earlier doesn't somehow seem worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, if you want to give a Peace Prize in the Horn, you could certainly think of the leaders of the civil society protests who managed to overthrow al-Bashir in Sudan. Or if you were really courageous and wanted to bestir controversy, you could give the Nobel Peace Prize to the protesters leading the Hong Kong protests. But no, it went to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. What's so peculiar about it is there's such an obvious recipient, and that recipient is Greta Thunberg. I mean, after all, this is a young woman of 16 who has galvanized the entire international community and particularly youth movements around the world. It would have been such an affirmation of young people if the Nobel Committee had given it to Greta Thunberg. And after all, when you think about peace, the greatest threat to peace over the next many years is going to be climate change. There'll be increased poverty, there will be climatic convulsions, there will be challenges to global health. We're well aware of all of that. But somehow Greta Thunberg was removed from the equation. They gave it to Malala 5 years ago, and this young, courageous woman, this Pakistani young woman, has managed to affirm girls' education around the world. But what Greta has done is really without precedent. As I say, I don't get it. I kind of think it's the boys' club. You know, did you notice that all of the Nobel Prize recipients this year are men? There was a woman for literature, but that was a holdover from last year. This year's appointments are all men. Boy, oh boy, it's a very peculiar world we live in. That was last week. I'm Stephen Lewis.